The United States once grew over 14,000 varieties of apples. Today, your grocery store carries maybe 12. What happened to the other 13,988? Some of them are gone forever, but some are still out there. Rare, strange, and in almost every case more interesting than anything sitting in that produce aisle. This is the story of 13 apples you've probably never heard of. Malice versi. Before there was a Honeycrisp, before there was a Fuji, before there was any apple you have ever eaten, there was this. Malice versi is a wild apple native to the mountains of Kazakhstan. It doesn't have a catchy name. It doesn't show up at farmers markets. Most people have never heard of it. But every single apple in your house right now is, genetically speaking, a descendant of this tree. DNA analysis confirmed it in 2010. Approximately 46% of the domestic apple genome traces directly back to wild Malice versi populations in Central Asia. The rest came from crab apples that crossbred with it along the Silk Road, as traders ate the fruit and discarded the seeds across thousands of miles of trade routes. The fruit itself is small, soft, and not particularly good to eat. Flavors range from honey sweet to bitter depending on which bees pollinated which tree. No two are exactly alike. A single tree can produce apples of completely different colors, shapes, and sizes. It is currently classified as vulnerable by the IUCN, threatened by urban development, livestock grazing, and climate change. The ancestor of every apple on Earth is quietly disappearing in a mountain forest most Americans couldn't find on a map. Daikyo. This is possibly the oldest named apple variety still alive today. Daikyo originated in the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, and historical records place it in the Roman Empire era. According to a 16th century Italian historian, this apple was carried by the Roman general Ezio during his military campaigns against Attila the Hun in Padua around 450 AD. The story may be legend, but the apple is real, and it is still being grown in small orchards in northern Italy today. It showed up again in the historical record in the 1520s, when it was reportedly served at banquets held by the Duke of Ferrara. For centuries, it remained a regional staple in the Po Valley before modern commercial varieties crowded it out. The apple itself is medium-sized with a greenish-yellow skin and a white, fine-grained flesh. The flavor is mild and sweet with a gentle acidity, what you might call a quiet apple. Nothing aggressive, just clean and pleasant. An apple that was already old when the Roman Empire fell. That survived the Dark Ages, the Renaissance, 2 world wars, and is still here. Newtown Pippin. This is one of the most important apples in American history, and almost no one under 50 has tasted one. The Newtown Pippin originated in Newtown, Queens, New York sometime in the late 1600s or early 1700s, making it one of the oldest apple varieties born on American soil. It spread quickly through the colonies, and by the mid-1700s it had become a favorite of Thomas Jefferson, who planted over 50 trees at Monticello between 1769 and 1814. But here is the part most people don't know. The Newtown Pippin was also the first American apple to be successfully exported to England, and it became so popular there that Queen Victoria's government temporarily lifted the import tax on American apples just to keep the supply flowing. An apple grown in Queens, New York was so good that the British government changed its trade policy for it. The flavor is sharp and aromatic with a dense, almost nutty quality. It starts tart and opens up into something richer as you chew. It holds its structure beautifully when cooked, which made it a favorite for pies and cider for 2 centuries. Today, it survives in a handful of specialty orchards in Virginia and California. Most Americans will never see one. Is Orange Pippin. If you ask a British person to name the greatest apple ever grown, there's a very good chance they say this one. Cox's Orange Pippin was first planted around 1825 in Buckinghamshire, England, by a retired brewer named Richard Cox. He wasn't a scientist or a horticulturalist, just a man with a garden and good instincts. DNA testing in 2022 finally identified its parents as 2 older varieties, Margil and Rosemary Russet. Cox had no idea what he was doing. He just grew it, and it turned out to be extraordinary. It remained largely unknown until a nursery added it to their catalog in 1850. Within 30 years, it was one of the most widely grown apples in Britain. Today, it accounts for over 50% of dessert apple acreage in England. The flavor is what makes people obsessive about it. It hits with a burst of sweetness and then opens into layers: pear, melon, citrus, a faint trace of mango. Some people say it tastes like freshly squeezed orange juice wrapped inside an apple. The flesh is fine-grained, very juicy, and the skin is thin enough that it disappears when you bite through it. It is almost impossible to find in the United States. The tree is notoriously difficult to grow, prone to scab, mildew, and cracking, and it doesn't survive shipping well. The British kept this one mostly to themselves, not on purpose, but because nature made it that way. Ashmead's kernel. It looks like someone left an apple in a bag for too long. The skin is dull brown and rough, matte and slightly bumpy, with none of the shine or color that makes modern apples look good on a shelf. Grocery stores won't touch it. Ashmead's kernel was first grown in Gloucestershire, England, in the early 1700s, reportedly by a physician named Dr. Ashmead, who raised it from seed in his garden. It has been grown continuously ever since. That's over 300 years. The flavor is the opposite of what the outside suggests. It's one of the most complex tasting apples in existence, intensely tart at first, then sweet, with a finish that lingers like a good whiskey or a sharp-aged cheese. Some people describe it as the apple equivalent of wine. Apple experts who refuse to agree on anything tend to agree on Ashmead's kernel. What makes it historically interesting is that it crossed the Atlantic and actually survived. Most Old World apples brought to North America by early settlers died out. They couldn't handle the climate. Ashmead's kernel adapted. It thrived. Today, it holds a position of quiet respect among serious orchardists on both sides of the Atlantic, even though most Americans have never heard its name. Famuse snow apple. This apple arrived in North America with French settlers in Quebec in the 1600s. No one is entirely sure where it came from before that. Possibly Normandy, possibly somewhere further east. Its origins were already a mystery when it reached the New World. What is not a mystery is what it looked like. The flesh of a famuse apple is white, not cream-colored, not ivory. White, striking and clean like snow, which is where the name comes from. The skin is a deep crimson red. Cut one open and the contrast is startling. The flavor is delicate and sweet, almost floral with very little acidity. It became enormously popular across New England and Quebec throughout the 1700s and early 1800s, beloved for fresh eating and cider making alike. Here is the part that most people don't realize. One of the famuse's seedlings, a chance cross discovered in Canada in the 1800s, became the Macintosh apple, which became one of the best-selling apples in American history, which became the inspiration for the name of a certain computer company. The direct lineage runs from a 17th century French apple that no American has ever heard of, to one of the most recognized brand names on Earth. Wine sap. The wine sap has been in America longer than the United States has been a country. Its exact origin is unknown, but it was already well established in New Jersey and Virginia by the late 1700s. Became one of the defining apples of the American South, particularly in Virginia and the Appalachian region, where it was grown on almost every farm for over 100 years. The name is not a marketing invention. A wine sap, when pressed and left to sit, produces a juice that smells almost exactly like cider already in progress. The aroma is rich and fermented adjacent, winey, spiced with a dark fruitiness that is hard to describe and easy to recognize. Fully fermented, it was considered by many to be the finest cider apple in the eastern United States. Eaten fresh, it delivers a bold, sharp flavor, intensely tart with a spicy, almost peppery edge and a sweetness that only comes through at the end. The flesh is firm and very yellow, dense enough that it holds up for months in cold storage. At its peak, wine sap was one of the top 5 commercial apples in the country. Today, it survives in heritage orchards and among cider makers who know what they're working with. Roxbury russet. This is the oldest apple variety with an American origin that is still being grown today. The Roxbury russet appeared in Roxbury, Massachusetts, now part of Boston, sometime around 1635. That is nearly 400 years ago. The Pilgrims had been in New England for 15 years. Harvard College had just been founded, and someone in what is now a Boston neighborhood was growing an apple that is still alive in orchards today. The skin is rough, dull green to yellowish brown, covered in that dry, corky texture called russet. It looks nothing like a modern apple, picked up off a table next to a gala. It would look like a mistake, but the Roxbury russet was not bred for looks. It was bred for survival. The flavor is rich and sharp, high in acid, nutty, and complex, and the apple keeps for an extraordinary length of time. In the era before refrigeration, that was everything. Families in colonial New England stored barrels of them in root cellars and ate fresh apples in February and March, months after every other variety had turned to mush. It was also the dominant cider apple of colonial Massachusetts. The economy of early New England ran partly on Roxbury russet cider. This apple helped build a country. Hidden Rose. In the 1960s, a farmer in the Willamette Valley of Oregon was clearing land and pulling up old root systems when he found a tree he didn't recognize. It looked ordinary from the outside, green skin, slightly waxy, nothing remarkable. Then someone cut it open. The flesh was rose pink, almost red, vivid and unexpected in a way that stopped people mid-motion. Not pink like a blush, pink like the inside of a watermelon, saturated and bright. Nobody knew where the tree came from. Nobody knew its parentage. It had simply been growing there, unnoticed, for what appeared to be a very long time. The flavor matches the appearance. Bright, sweet, with a strong pineapple and berry note that is unusual for an apple. The acidity is lively but not sharp. It eats like something tropical accidentally grew in the Pacific Northwest. It survives today almost entirely through the effort of a small network of orchardists in Oregon and Washington who recognized what they had and refused to let it disappear. You will not find it in any chain grocery store. You will probably not find it anywhere unless you look specifically for it. But it exists, and it is one of the stranger and more beautiful things the American apple landscape has produced. Ribston Pippin, the Cox's Orange Pippin, which you heard about earlier, is widely considered the greatest English apple ever grown. Ribston Pippin is its parent. It originated in the early 1700s from a seed reportedly brought back from Rouen, France, and planted at Ribston Hall in Yorkshire. The tree that grew from that seed became one of the most influential apples in British history. Nearly every complex, aromatic English dessert apple grown in the last 2 centuries traces some of its genetics back to Ribston. The flavor is intense, sharply sweet, richly aromatic, with a spicy quality that people often compare to nutmeg or clove. The flesh is firm and crisp and the juice runs. It is at its best about 2 to 3 weeks after picking, when the acids mellow slightly and the full aromatics come forward. The original Ribston Pippin tree at Ribston Hall stood for over 200 years before it finally fell in a storm in the 1800s. A sucker from its roots was grafted and kept alive. The tree that exists today is a direct continuation of the original, maintained through unbroken vegetative propagation across 3 centuries. Sierra Beauty. This one has been lost and found twice. Sierra Beauty was first documented in the 1890s on the slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. The prevailing theory is that it grew from a seed discarded by a gold rush miner sometime in the 1850s, a piece of fruit eaten during the most chaotic and transformative period in California history, its core thrown into the dirt and forgotten. Decades later, a tree was standing there, producing fruit unlike anything anyone had named. It disappeared from commercial records in the early 20th century. Then it was rediscovered. Then it disappeared again. Then rediscovered again. Each time by someone who came across an old tree in a remote location and recognized it as something worth saving. The apple is beautiful, yellow-green base with bright red striping, almost painted looking. The flavor is sweet and lightly tart with a crispness that holds even after months in cold storage. Some people detect a faint honey note. It is, by any measure, an excellent apple. It just had the misfortune of existing in an era that wanted uniformity over quality. Today, it is grown in small quantities in Northern California, kept alive by people who believe that an apple with that kind of history deserves to persist.